Reading from John chapter 21, verses 1 through 19. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them, and though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came back and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Glory to Jesus Christ. So, my friends, have you ever felt ashamed, guilty, unforgivable, so embarrassed by yourself that you just wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear? Most of us have had this sort of experience at least once in our lives. Today we've heard about one whom mightily ashamed person, Simon Peter, and how Jesus loved him, and by extension, us. Very soon after the appearance of the disciples, including Thomas, Simon Peter and some of the disciples, male disciples, were back in Galilee fishing. We tend to think that all the disciples were in the upper room where Thomas touched the resurrected Jesus. But it's not clear they were all there, especially Simon Peter, who had denied Jesus 3 times just before Jesus was crucified. What we see is that he has run away from Jerusalem some 75 miles north back to fishing, as he had before he met Jesus. He said to be naked, and that he covered himself when it was announced that it was Jesus, maybe so his shame and guilt would not be revealed. When he hears that Jesus has called from the shore, Simon Peter gets dressed and jumps into the water. Maybe like me, you assume he jumps in on the shore side so he can get to Jesus fast. Maybe, friends, he jumps on the other side of the boat and holds on so Jesus doesn't see him because he's ashamed. Then we get to the shore. You remember Adam and Eve, what happened after the little incident with the apple they weren't supposed to eat? God's walking in the cool of the night in the garden. And Adam, what does Adam do? He hides, as though you can hide from God. Peter's doing the same thing, isn't he? And they get to shore. We think of Simon Peter running up to Jesus. Well, it's not really clear that he does that, is it? He's the one at the boat who hauls in the fish when Jesus says, bring the fish. Probably because he's closest to the water. And he does it, dutifully. See, I'm doing what you asked. I'm bringing in the fish, just like you said, right? And he hauls in this huge, heavy load all by himself. Yeah. Now, so then Jesus feeds the disciples bread and fish, right? So he comes up and he hands the bread and then he hands the fish. And you can see that he probably kind of looks at them, and you can kind of imagine Peter going, yeah, thanks. Not looking up, not really wanting to see Jesus' face as he's being fed. So afterwards, Jesus comes right down there and gets right next to Simon Peter and has this conversation. Now, in Greek, there are multiple words for love. There's sort of the unconditional love of God, and there's a love, a brotherly, sisterly love, and some others. And so you don't get this in the translation. But what Jesus says to him is, says, Peter, Simon. He's using Simon's full name. He refers to him as the son of John. He says, do you love me with the unconditional love of God? And Peter says, well, I love you with brotherly love. Jesus says, take care of my sheep, right? Feed my lambs. He asks him again the same way, and Peter answers the same way, and Jesus responds again, take care of these that I have before you. And so Jesus then asks him, well, do you love me with brotherly love? You can feel the tension. Peter breaks. Jesus has noticed that he hasn't said, I love you with unconditional love. I only love you as a brother. And he must be breaking. He says, you know everything. Well, I love you, using the brotherly term. And Jesus says then, take care of them, huh? And he breaks the tension by coming to Peter with love, with forgiveness. And Peter's going, no. I don't want to admit this. And he finally breaks. He wants to hide. You can just see Peter sobbing with joy and shame as he has this final exchange with Jesus. And Jesus does more than this. He gives Peter back his old job. He says, take care of these. He restores Peter's identity as a disciple, as a follower. He restores his purpose. He gives him something to do. a road of service that's not pleasant and will lead to suffering and even death. So for those of us who can recall having failed someone at a task or disappointed a parent or a grandparent, a spouse or a child or an employer or a co-worker, it is that invitation to come back to work that seems to confirm the forgiveness that we seek. Yes, you failed, but I trust you and I want to work with you. That's what we long to hear. When I was a young fellow, I was still not a good driver then either. I managed to bang up the side of my parents' car on a guardrail. And the car required some significant repairs. After it was repaired, my parents said, "Here are the keys." That was a big deal. That was a moment where even though I had screwed up and damaged the car, they were going to let me drive it again. I was not doomed forever to the hell of not being able to drive the car. It meant a great deal, and I think that's how Jesus handled Peter. He said, "All right, you screwed up, but you can drive this wagon." So what circumstance in your life haunts you with shame and guilt and unforgiveness? We don't like to think about those, right? What mess-ups have you committed? What relationships have you crashed and burned? What duties and responsibilities have you failed at? I mean, maybe I'm the only one in the room who's ever done those things. I don't know. But most of us have that experience, I expect. They're often the deepest disappointments and fears and reasons for self-hatred that we carry with us. The person who cheats on a spouse, the child who steals from a relative, the person who drinks and drives into somebody else, the person who gives up trying to parent a child and disappears, and all sorts of other common moments that bring great shame and brand us as failure. But Jesus comes to find us. Jesus comes wherever we're hiding. Jesus sees our nakedness and our shame. He watches us as we try to hide and hang back. He lovingly watches if we try to please Him, doing good and trying our heroic feats or just plodding through the high water of life. And Jesus gives first and foremost a bounty of nourishment to us. Like an amazingly large load of fish He gave those disciples. And then He feeds us. He feeds us what we need. And He speaks our names. We're not just the big failure. We are Bob, Bill, Ralph, Ingrid, Harriet, Ella, Pat, Suzanne, whatever your name is. He speaks our name with love. As He does so, at first it seems like burning coals because we're ashamed. And then we find in this wonderful love. This, my sisters and brothers, is what Jesus has for each of us. A reconciling love that bridges all the shame and guilt we've built up in ourselves and shows us a love that restores us to that relationship with God. It gives us our identities, our purpose, our hope, our future. To help us, Jesus calls us to service. He gives us work to do. That's how you know He really meant it. Because He says, yeah, you broken person, you person who think you're a failure, I'm sending you to do my work with others. We can't believe it, but it's there for us. In some small way, we're sent out to bless others, and in doing so, bless back the one who has loved us, even though we know in our minds we don't deserve it. And this gift is yours today. Abundant love, the gift of service to give, a joy to experience that wipes away shame and guilt and unworthiness all at once. So friends, let down the nets again into the water, waters that have yielded nothing, and trust that God will provide, that God will yield you something wonderful, that your shame and guilt is given to Jesus, and that his accepting love transforms you and gives you the work and the joy for a lifetime of thanksgiving. Thanks be to God. Amen.